Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this new webinar from the European Menopause and Andropause Society. Today, our speaker is Professor Petra Stute from Switzerland with the topic non-hormonal therapies for menopause. And before to start with our speaker today, I would like to remind our attendees that in the control panel you have an option that is called questions, and you can write if you have some question for Professor Stute, and at the end of the webinar she will answer very kind. So now, please, Professor Stute, when you want.
Okay, welcome everybody to the webinar, Non-hormonal therapies for menopause. I'm quite excited to sit here at my desk and to talk to people probably all over Europe at least. So the goal of the presentation is to provide treatment options for menopausal women suffering from hot flushes who do not want or have a contraindication to hormone therapy. And at the end of the presentation, I will also provide 3 slides addressing vaginal atrophy symptoms, which may also be treated with non-hormonal products. Just a reminder at the beginning, if we have a study showing a significant hot flush reduction, that does not necessarily correspond to a complete freedom of symptoms. I think that's also important to tell to the patients that they will have no guarantee that all hot flushes will disappear within a certain time frame. And this applies to both non-hormonal and hormonal treatments. I will cover in my talk different kind of non-hormonal therapies, and the first bigger part is the complementary and alternative treatment options, and the second part will be the non-hormonal pharmacotherapy. I'm quite aware that probably there are tons of other treatments available to treat menopausal hot flushes non-hormonally. However, I would like to focus on those that have been studied in randomized controlled trials. So first we are going to start to have a look at the complementary and alternative therapies, and in this category fall lifestyle changes, mind-body techniques, phytoestrogens, herbal treatments, acupuncture, and stellate ganglion block. Now if we have a look at lifestyle changes, there are different or varying recommendations falling into this category. And I think we all know the recommendations, especially in the lay press, that recommend dressing in layers, using a hand fan or electric fan, or just reducing the room temperature at night. However, there are no randomized controlled trials that investigated the efficacy of those cooling techniques. And the same is true for avoiding triggers such as alcohol, spicy food, and hot drinks, for example. And that's why the level of evidence for this recommendation is 5 at the moment. Very interestingly, weight loss seems to have a positive effect on hot flushes. There are at least 2 randomized trials showing that body weight reduction of 10% is able to reduce or even stop hot flushes, and the same was found in healthy menopausal women as well in breast cancer survivors. What is a little bit frustrating probably at first sight is that it takes up to 1 to 2 years, but we will see later on that maybe the effect is seen quite earlier. Also, maybe surprising is the observation that exercise and yoga does not have an impact on hot flush frequency and intensity. We all know that exercise and yoga has a lot of other health benefits, but at the moment we cannot recommend exercise or yoga specifically to reduce hot flushes. I would like to go back to weight loss, and there's a quite recent study looking at 40 overweight or obese women presenting with at least 4 hot flushes per day, and they were randomized to weight loss intervention or to a control group. And the intervention meant that they had to go to group sessions 20 times, 1 hour each, and the whole program took 6 months, so much less time in comparison to the other studies before. And these women in this intervention group had a set calorie goal and a set physical activity goal. And after those 6 months, the women in the intervention group were able to lose 9 kilos, whereas the women in the control group put on a little bit of weight. If we have a look at the hot flush reduction, then there was a dramatic decrease of hot flushes in comparison to the control group. So again here, the weight loss program was not only effective in reducing weight, but also effective in reducing the frequency of hot flushes. And the reduction of weight loss, or the reduction of hot flushes and the weight loss, were significantly correlated. So I think that's quite a promising result, and specifically shows that it does not take years and years to have the benefit, but that maybe only 6 months are also already giving a benefit. Now we switch to mind-body techniques, and I think also this is something which should be incorporated in our discussion with a patient. So there are quite a number of studies looking at cognitive behavioral therapy, which was able to improve the vasomotor symptom problem rating, not specifically the hot flush frequency, but this benefit was quite impressive in healthy menopausal women and also in breast cancer survivors. Then mindfulness-based stress reduction was also able to reduce the intensity of hot flushes and the botherness that comes along with hot flushes. That was not a significant difference. However, I think a reduction of bother by about 45% is a good result. Clinical hypnosis also was able to reduce hot flush frequency and intensity significantly in healthy menopausal women and breast cancer survivors. If we look at different kind of respiration techniques or relaxation techniques, there's a level of evidence, one, that those techniques are not able to be better than placebo in reducing hot flush frequency and intensity. Now we switch to phytoestrogens. Phytoestrogens are non-steroidal serums, and there are three main types of phytoestrogens, and these are isoflavones, comistans, and lignans. And isoflavones include several biochemicals such as genistein, dietzein, and so on. And the main source of isoflavones are soybeans, and there are also other plants like red clover, which is a source of isoflavones. And genistein and dietzein are the biochemicals that are thought to be the determinants of the efficacy that soy supplementation provides. However, the relative amounts of the isoflavones mentioned may vary depending on the portion of the soybean that is used. For example, for extracting isoflavones, the whole soybean can be used, the soy germ, or the soy protein. The isoflavone dietzein is metabolized to S-equal. However, only 30 to 50% of people have the intestinal bacteria to produce equal. And if we compare S-equal to estradiol, then the affinity of S-equal to the estrogen receptor alpha is about 2% in comparison to estradiol, and 20% in comparison to estradiol when we look at the affinity for the estrogen receptor beta. Most importantly, that's what we are looking at, is the efficacy. And right now, there are at least 5 meta-analyses or systematic reviews with contrasting results. Actually, 4 of those meta-analyses and systematic reviews did not prove superiority of soy isoflavones in comparison to placebo. However, the latest or more recent meta-analysis showed a significant reduction of hot flashes in healthy menopausal women. And to get an idea of the impact soy isoflavones had in this studies, or what we can expect, that's a hot flash frequency reduction of up to 60% in comparison to placebo, up to 50%. However, if we wanted to give soy isoflavones to women after breast cancer, there are 4 randomized controls who had a look at this subject, and there was actually no effect on daily hot flash frequency, even if the dosage of soy isoflavones was increased to 150 milligrams per day. So if a woman would like to start soy-phytoestrogens, the actual recommended starting dosage is 50 to 60 milligram isoflavones per day, or 30 milligram genistein extract per day, and the woman should start to use it for first 12 weeks, and then the re-evaluation will show if it's worth to continue or to switch to another treatment. What about the safety? Side effects are quite rarely and mild, so gastrointestinal symptoms is what a patient can expect to develop. But more importantly is the question if soy phytoestrogens have a negative impact or a positive impact on the mammary gland and on the endometrium. So the good news is that soy food consumption is associated with a lower risk of developing breast cancer, at least in observational studies, and that there is no hint for a negative impact on breast cancerosis or cancer recurrence for soy food consumption. But that's only soy food consumption, and the question is if extracts of isoflavones may have another effect on the mammary gland. And at least from studies in cell culture, for example, we know that the isoflavone genistein may promote the growth of estrogen receptor positive breast cancer cells. If we have a look at the endometrium, again, we know that there is no negative impact of soy food consumption on the risk of endometrial cancer. In contrast, the risk seems to be lowered. And if we have a look at soy isoflavones supplementation, then there's no uterotrophic effect in women. However, we do not have long-term data, so this statement is only true for short-term intervention. But given that there are not enough data for long-term use in menopausal women, the North American Menopause Society stated in 2011 that at the moment, specific recommendations regarding soy or isoflavone consumption by breast cancer survivors cannot be made. And we have no indication in humans so far that there's a negative impact, but from cell culture and rodent studies, there might be a potential for risk, and that's why it's the recommendations are a little bit not given. Let's put it this way. We change to the next plant. This is now not a phytoestrogen, it's a herbal therapy, and one of the most frequently used herb in the treatment for menopausal women is black cohosh or Simicifoga racemosa. The mechanism of action of black cohosh is via neurotransmitter modulation, and that's why it's not a phytoestrogen like soy isoflavones, but it has a completely different mechanism of action. So far, 4 monographs have been published with climacteric and menopausal symptoms as accepted indication. The issue with black cohosh is that worldwide the regulation differs from country to country. That means, for example, in the US, black cohosh is regulated as a food supplement, whereas, for example, here in Switzerland and also in Germany, an isopropanoic or ethanolic black cohosh extract is registered as medicinal product following GMP guidelines, which means that according to this GMP guidelines, it's like a medical treatment and it's not a food supplement which has not all these, does not have to fulfill all the requirements the authorities want. And this might also explain why there are differences in the studies when looking at efficacy. If we only focused on the Cochrane database analysis from 2012, which included 16 randomized controlled trials, then the conclusion of the authors is not really helping us, because they are saying that the heterogeneity between the studies is so huge that at the moment we cannot give any recommendation for black cohosh on vasomotor symptom control. However, and that was found in another study a year later, if we only use those randomized controlled trials which were performed with an authorized medicinal product within the recommended indication, then the picture changes and we see that for those medicinal products of black cohosh, a significant hot flash reduction was found. So if a woman would like to try black cohosh, then the recommended starting dosage would be 40 milligram drug per day. Again, we have to look at safety issues. And first of all, there is a quite recent review of 35 clinical trials, of which 25 trials used a medicinal product. And there's one meta-analysis which in total covers more than 13,000 subjects. And in this review, good to very good safety in general and on estrogen-sensitive organs and the liver was found. If we now specifically look at breast cancer patients, unfortunately there's no randomized controlled trial or even placebo-controlled trial. However, there's one big study from 2007. It's a pharmacoepidemiological cohort study showing safety for black cohosh in breast cancer survivors. And if we have a closer look at the liver, then there is a meta-analysis of 5 randomized controlled trials in peri- and postmenopausal women demonstrating no evidence for a problem for the liver if black cohosh is used 3 to 6 months of treatment, and you can see the drug dosage was even as high as almost 130 milligrams per day. There are tons of other herbal therapies that can be used and that are recommended by a lot of pharmaco or companies too. However, you can see that the number of placebo-controlled trials is much lower or smaller in comparison to the controlled trials we have for soy, isoflavones, and black cohosh. And at the moment, all those herbal therapies mentioned here, such as wild gem cream, dong quai, evening primrose, flaxseed, ginseng, hops, maca, and hypericum, have not been found to be superior to placebo, and that's why at the moment they are not recommended for hot flush reduction. Now we switch to acupuncture. If we have a look at the most recent systematic review and meta-analysis from 2013, the results are quite, I don't want to say negative, but not so impressive as one would expect. So in comparison to hormone therapy, acupuncture was found to be less effective, and in comparison to sham acupuncture, there was no difference found, but at least acupuncture was better than doing nothing. If we look at the study, the biggest study published after 2013, that's probably this one, published in this year. And this is a study in more than 300 peri- and postmenopausal women presenting with moderate to severe hot flushes. And those women either received traditional acupuncture for 8 weeks or a sham acupuncture again for 8 weeks. The good news is that both groups showed an improvement of symptoms. However, there was no benefit, or the real acupuncture was not superior to sham acupuncture. However, I'm not so pessimistic as these studies may show, but probably I'm also biased because we had our own study a couple of years ago in postmenopausal women with hot flushes, 20 hot flushes per week. That was the inclusion criteria, and we treated them either with acupuncture or sham acupuncture for 12 weeks. That was also a randomized controlled trial, and we could find a significant reduction of hot flush frequency and hot flush severity. So I think probably we still have to wait for more studies until we finally can find a recommendation. The next on final subject in the category alternative and complementary therapy is the quite promising stellate ganglion block, which is widely used as a treatment for pain management. And actually what is done is it's an image-guided injection of a local anesthetic at the C6 level. And so far there are a couple of studies looking at the efficacy of stellate ganglion block, and in these studies a reduction of hot flushes up to 90% was found, and this effect lasted for at least 6 weeks, and in some studies even longer. So that's quite promising. There's one randomized controlled trial showing no effect of the stellate ganglion block on overall hot flush frequency. However, if only moderate and very severe hot flushes were investigated, then the stellate ganglion block had a significantly positive impact in comparison to the sham control group. And of course, larger studies are needed here to get more information about this quite intriguing treatment option. Now we switch to the second part. That's the category non-hormonal pharmacotherapy. And within this category, we will have the antidepressants, anticonvulsants, and antihypertensives. We will start with the antidepressants. In this group, we have the SSRI and the SNRI. And within the group of the SSRI, we have paroxetine, and paroxetine salt is approved by the FDA for the treatment of moderate to severe menopausal symptoms. However, it's not approved in Europe, for example. In the second column, you will see the number of randomized controlled trials that have been performed in healthy menopausal women and in breast cancer survivors, respectively. And in the following columns, you will see the range of the sample size, which is quite big. For example, because paroxetine was approved, the number of subjects included in those studies are the biggest. The duration ranges between 4 weeks and 36 or 52 weeks, and the dosage may also vary, as you can see. If we look at efficacy, we first have a look at paroxetine, and here we can see that hot flushes are reduced by 40 to 65% by paroxetine, and the placebo effect was up to almost 40%. Sertraline and fluoxetine have not been found to have a positive impact on hot flush reduction, whereas citalopram and escitalopram decrease hot flush frequency by about 50%. And the same is true for the SNRI venlafaxine and desvenlafaxine. They also may reduce hot flush frequency by up to 50 to 60%. And the placebo effect is quite high, at least for desvenlafaxine, up to 50%. So the side effects we may expect are the following: dry mouth, sleep disturbances, nausea, headache, dizziness, and these effects are, of course, dose dependent, and most of them improve after 1 to 2 weeks. So it's important to inform the woman that in the first or second week she might have some side effects, but that's not enough reason to immediately stop the medication, but to wait, and most likely those symptoms are going to disappear. There are also some other antidepressants like mirtazapine and bupropion, and so far there are not the same number of randomized controlled trials compared to the other SSRI and SNRI treatments. Here we have mainly observational studies and in breast cancer patients, and at least for mirtazapine there was a reduction of hot flushes around the same level as was shown for SSRI and SNRI. So what is the recommended starting dosage? If we choose to use paroxetine, for example, and we are living in the US, then it's quite easy, because then we can start with 2.5 milligram paroxetine salt. We can use it as a single dose. We can give it in the evening, and it will not have an effect on weight, sleep, or libido in a negative effect. So we do not need any titration. However, if we are not living in the US and we only have the conventional SSRI and SNRI available, then we can start with 10 milligram per day paroxetine, citalopram or escitalopram, and then we can increase it slowly to the desired dosage. Especially for desvenlafaxine, it's worth to start quite low with 25 to 50 milligram per day, and then to titrate it up to the amount we would like to have. And usually those antidepressants are given in the morning. What about the safety? Of course, there are quite some adverse events that might occur, but most importantly, we would have to be sure that there is no contraindication, like, for example, any co-medication that may interfere with the antidepressants. And we have to have a look at the comorbidities of the women, meaning that we should exclude liver or kidney insufficiency. The woman should not have a not well-treated hypertension, and if she is already taken an antidepressant, we also have to be careful about that. The biggest concern usually is about using an SSRI in breast cancer survivors that are treated with tamoxifen. And the reason for this concern is that an SSRI may lead to an inhibition of the enzyme CYP2D6, and that which would have a disturbed metabolism of tamoxifen as consequence. And this is especially true for paroxetine and fluoxetine. So this means in women with breast cancer using tamoxifen, paroxetine and fluoxetine should be avoided, and instead we could use venlafaxine or desvenlafaxine or escitalopram or citalopram. We switched to the second group of non-hormonal pharmacotherapy, and this is the group of anticonvulsants. Here we have 7 randomized controlled trials for gabapentin and 1 randomized controlled trial for pregabalin in healthy menopausal women, and we have 2 randomized controlled trials for gabapentin in breast cancer survivors. And the sample size ranges between 50 and 600 women, and the study duration from 4 weeks to 24 weeks. And the intervention for gabapentin is 300 to 2,700 milligram per day, and the dose range for pregabalin is 150 to 300 milligram per day. So what can we expect? If we have a look at gabapentin first, then the studies demonstrated a significant reduction of hot flash frequency and also hot flash intensity, which was much more pronounced in comparison to the placebo effect. And this reduction of hot flashes corresponds to a hot flash frequency reduction of about 2 to 2.5 hot flashes per day if we give 900 milligram per day. If we are taking higher dosages up to 2,400 milligram per day, for example, then the efficacy is comparable to estrogen therapy or also to an SNRI therapy. If we look at the efficacy of pregabalin, we again find a significant reduction of hot flash frequency corresponding to about a reduction of 1.5 hot flashes per day if we use 150 milligram pregabalin per day. The side effects may be drowsiness, dizziness, headache, which are mostly self-limiting after 2 to 4 weeks. What is the recommended starting dose? Again, gabapentin can be started with 1 pill of 300 milligram given at night, and then we can add another 300 milligram at the next night and another 300 milligram in the morning, so that we have 900 milligram at least per day. And as you can see, the dose range is quite big, so we can still increase the dosage depending on the side effects. And for pregabalin, the starting dose, which would be 3 times 50 milligram or lower depending on the side effect profile per day. The last medication falling into the non-hormonal pharmacotherapy category is clonidine. That's an antihypertensive, and it's a centrally active alpha-2 adrenergic agonist. There are 5 randomized controlled trials in healthy as well as in breast cancer patients. The sample size ranges from 19 to 149 women, the study duration 4 weeks to 12 weeks. And the intervention may differ. Some studies used an oral preparation and some used a transdermal preparation. And the efficacy results look quite impressive on first sight. However, in comparison to placebo, the results were only partly significant and less effective when compared to SSRI, SNRI, or gabapentin. Of course, there may also be side effects like dry mouth, constipation, nausea, dizziness, or sleeping disturbances. So we come to the summary of this part, and you will see soon that I adapted or modified the recommendation tables from the North American Menopause Society published last year. So first of all, before we have a look at those recommendation tables, it's worth to give some explanations. So the recommendation level takes the benefit-risk profile into account. And this may differ depending on the frequency and intensity of hot flushes. It depends on the patient history, her co-medication, comorbidities, adverse events, and of course barriers of time and cost, for example. The therapy should always be carefully re-evaluated, e.g. after 12 weeks, and then every 6 to 12 weeks, months, since we do not have long-term data for all of these interventions. And if the recommendation is not recommended at this time, that does not correspond to a contraindication. I think that's very important. It's always worth to discuss it with the patient that we do not have enough data at the moment to really recommend this treatment, but that we are not expecting any harm with it. So we have a look at the first table, which comprises lifestyle changes and mind-body techniques. And as mentioned at the beginning, since we do not have any randomized controlled trials on cooling techniques and on avoiding triggers, they are not recommended at the moment. Unfortunately, exercise and yoga did not have that benefit on hot flushes as expected. That's why at the moment, of course, we should not restrict a woman from doing exercise and yoga, but if she's specifically asking about a treatment to reduce hot flushes, we do not have the data at the moment that shows that exercise and yoga will be effective in this context. Weight loss seems to be quite promising, especially it's important that probably it doesn't take years to have the results, but that even a 6-month intervention seems to be effective. If we look at mind-body techniques, again, cognitive behavioral therapy and hypnosis seem to be quite promising, and only for paced respiration and relaxation, which will have their indication in other symptom reduction, are not that effective here in hot flush reduction. That's why they are not recommended at this time. If we have a look now at phytoestrogens, specifically soy isoflavones, then they can be recommended. However, we have to be careful in women with breast cancer and maybe should switch to another herbal therapy if the woman wants to stay with a plant-based therapy, which could be black cohosh. And it's quite important to be aware that black cohosh comes along in all kind of different styles as food supplementation or as a medicinal product. So it's worth to have a look at what kind of product we have or the country has, and so we can, if it's a medicinal product, it's worth to give it a try for hot flush reduction. Acupuncture at the moment, not so promising as expected, but there are studies that are showing a benefit, so it's worth a try if a woman has the time and the money to do that. And the same is true for stellate ganglion block. However, here we still need some more data to really be able to recommend it to more women. If we now have a look at the antidepressants and anticonvulsants and antihypertensives, then they are quite effective. But again, we have to be careful about which SSRI we are using in breast cancer survivors with tamoxifen. So in these cases, an SNRI would be a better choice. And for these medications, it's also very important to keep in mind that there is no approval. The regulatory authorities, only paroxetine salt is the SSRI approved by the FDA. So this means we have to inform about off-label use when we want to prescribe it. Now, as mentioned at the very beginning, 3 more slides addressing the subject vulvovaginal atrophy, which is now called genitourinary syndrome of menopause. And there is a wide variety of products available in all the countries. This is a list of products frequently used in the US. However, this list may differ, as I said, from country to country. Most importantly, lubricants have to be differentiated from moisturizers. Usually, lubricants are only used for sexual intercourse. That means there is no long-lasting effect to be expected, whereas vaginal moisturizers keep the moisture for up to 24 hours. So it's much more, makes more sense to use a moisturizer if you want to treat vaginal atrophy symptoms and not to use a lubricant in this condition. And one of the most frequently used moisturizer is Replan's. This is also the moisturizer which was studied most frequently in clinical trials. And this is just an overview of the trials that have been performed with non-hormonal vaginal products in comparison to vaginal estrogens. And if we perform a trial in vaginal atrophic women, then we also have to distinguish between subjective and objective endpoints. And here you can see the results for the subjective atrophy endpoints. So you see that, for example, that there are quite some studies showing that the non-hormonal moisturizer Replan's was as effective as vaginal estrogens to reduce or improve subjective vaginal symptoms. And there's also another study using a hormone-free gel, which was as effective as an estriol cream for subjective and objective symptom decrease. And there's another study showing that isoflavones are as effective as conjugated equine estrogens provided vaginally, and that the vaginal isoflavone gel was more effective than the placebo. I think that's quite important to know that, first of all, there are not so many studies actually comparing non-hormonal vaginal products with vaginal estrogens, but those studies we have are quite promising. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention and invite you to the next EMAS meeting, which will take place in Amsterdam next year in May, and maybe we can see each other again then. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Stute, for a fantastic presentation. And now we continue with our next activity in this webinar from the European Menopause and Andropause Society with our polls. I will explain shortly the procedure. A question will appear in your screen, and you will have a few seconds for answer the option that you think that is correct, and after we will tell the correct answer. Here are the results from our first questions. Perimenopausal woman present with hot flashes. Which treatment is a LOEI recommendation? 22% of our attendees answered the option A, clonidine. 70% of our attendees answered the option B, paroxetine. And 9% of our attendees answered the option C, acupuncture. In this case, the correct answer, it was the option B, paroxetine. And we continue with our next question. Here are the results from our second question. Postmenopausal breast cancer using tamoxifen present with hot flashes. What do you recommend? 14% of our attendees answered the option A, soy isoflavones. 61% of our attendees answered the option B, black cohosh. And 25% of our attendees answered the option C, paroxetine. In this case, the correct answer, it was the option B. And we continue with our last question today. Here are the results for our last question today. 35-year-old otherwise healthy woman presents with hot flashes due to premature ovarian insufficiency. What do you recommend? 22% of our attendees answer the option A, gabapentin. 4% of our attendees answer the option B, yoga. And 74 of our attendees answered the option C, hormone therapy. In this case, the correct answer, it was the option C. And we continue with this webinar from the European Menopause and Andropause Society. And as we remind at the beginning of this webinar, you have in the control panel an option called questions that you could ask if you want to Professor Stute. And at this moment, we don't have any questions, so we are going to leave 1 more minute. So if some of our attendees want to ask something to Professor Stute, she will be very happy to answer. looks like that there is no questions for Professor Stute. So from the European Menopause and Andropause Society, we would like to thank you to all of our attendees. And we are very happy to announce that this webinar is being recorded. And all the EMAS Society members will have available in their private space in our website in the next days. And for our attendees that are not members of the EMAS Society, we would like to invite them to visit our website and become a member. And also you have the possibility to send an email to us to our email address info@emas-online.org and ask for a trial membership. And before to say goodbye today, we would like from the EMAS Society that our attendees will answer a quick questionnaire regarding this webinar, and it will appear in a window just after leave this webinar. And if you don't have time now, you will get the questions by email, and it will be very kind from you if you can answer. So thank you very much to everyone, and hoping to see you next time. Thank you once again.